Good evening, my dear friends, and welcome to our fourth session of Nurturing Relationships, where we have been diving in to the Torah's guidance and perspective on how to nurture and strengthen our connections with family, with friends, with the people around us in the way where we can actually enhance our relationships by the Torah's guidelines and the Torah's teachings and insight. So there is the famous story of Mr. Goldberg who passes away. And Mr. Goldberg lives in a small town, and the rabbi happens to be out of town when he passes away, and there's no one to do the funeral. So they have to call the next town over, maybe from Destin, and they call the rabbi, and they're like, "Rabbi, we need someone to come and do the funeral for old Mr. Goldberg. He just passed away." So the rabbi is like, "Sure, no problem. I'll come over." So the other rabbi, Rabbi Smith, comes all the way across, comes down the interstate, and does the funeral for Mr. Goldberg. And he gets up there and says, "We are here gathered today to mourn the passing of our dear friend, Mr. Goldberg, a respected individual in the community, honored." And suddenly in the back, all the way in the last row of the people who are sitting and attending the funeral, an old guy gets up and he screams out, "Mr. Goldberg, an honorable member? Oh no, that man was a crook. He would cheat you for 50 cents. And the rabbi's like, okay, I don't know him. And he starts again. He's like, "We're here to mourn the passing of our dear friend, Mr. Goldberg, a very big patron of the synagogue and a big scholar." And again, the guy gets up. He's like, "A scholar? You gotta be kidding me. This guy hasn't walked in the synagogue since his bar mitzvah." And the rabbi tries a third time. He's like, "We're here to mourn the passing of Mr. Goldberg, a loving husband and a very dedicated father." And again, the guy gets up. He's like, "Rabbi, you must obviously never have met Mr. Goldberg. He was rude to his wife. He couldn't care any less about his kids." So at this point, the rabbi's a little bit of a loss of words, and he's like, "Okay, my friends, does anyone have anything good to say about Mr. Goldberg? I'm sure there is someone who has something positive to say about him." So the old man gets up again, and he's like, after a moment of thought, he's like, "Well, I guess his brother was worse." So sometimes in our relationships, we sometimes can find it hard to find nice things to say about other people. Not because they lack virtue, not because people are bad people. God forbid. Most of the people we try to surround ourselves with are probably or hopefully good people. But there is a phenomenon called negativity bias. And negativity bias says that if you want to have the best sales of your newspaper, the most clicks on your news article, you're going to have to put a really bad headline. A headline that's as negative as you can find. If you say, "Well, this and this guy donated X amount to whatever," no one's going to read it. No one cares. If you say, "This and this businessman stole so much from this and this nonprofit," everyone's going to be reading it. It's going to be the news in town, right? It's the way it is. Unfortunately, we have a negativity bias. We are inclined to look at things in a negative way, and that interests us, and it piques our curiosity, and we have this inclination to remember insults more than we remember compliments. It's a very unfortunate thing, but it's a very real fact in life, where we notice the negativity more than the positivity. So, in order to get a little bit of a broader look into this concept, we have a little video today where it's on this idea how we unfortunately have this negativity bias where we look onto the negative too often. Give a look at the video.
experiences more vividly than positive ones? It's due to a concept called negativity bias. Negativity bias is our tendency to focus more on negative events. It's why insults linger longer than compliments, and why bad news grabs our attention more than good news. This bias deeply affects how we judge others. For example, a study found that if an interviewer initially liked a candidate for a job, just 3.8 pieces of negative data about the candidate were needed to change their mind and reject the unlucky applicant. But it took 8.8 pieces of positive data, more than double, to shift an initial negative impression to a positive one. Negativity bias is rooted in our survival instinct. Ignoring good traits isn't dangerous, but overlooking bad traits might be. So we're wired to be on alert for negativity and to err on the side of caution. Now let's explore another concept that affects our judgment of others. Fundamental attribution error. Imagine you're stuck in traffic and the driver cuts the line by riding the shoulder. Your instinctive reaction might be, "What an arrogant jerk." But that reaction is a classic example of the fundamental attribution error, where we overemphasize personality traits and downplay situational factors. Who says the driver is arrogant? Maybe they're rushing to a hospital, but our minds instinctively jump to internal attributions. That driver is entitled, instead of considering external situational factors. Of course, sometimes the person who behaves negatively does have negative characteristics or intentions, but research has shown that it's not nearly as often as people think. Understanding these two biases, both well documented by research, raises important questions. How do these biases affect our relationships? What can we do to reduce their impact? What do you think?
So Brian bumps into his doctor in the local grocery store. And he's like, "Hey, doctor, it's great to see you. I have some really good news to share with you." Doctor's like, "I'd love to hear." He's like, "You remember I came to you a few weeks ago? I'm having all these voices in my head and it's disturbing me from sleeping and I can't focus." Doctor's like, yeah, of course, I remember." So Brian's like, "Listen, those voices are all gone." The doctor's like, "Wow, Brian, that's wonderful. I'm so happy to hear that." Brian's like, "Wonderful? It's a disaster. I think I'm starting to lose my hearing." So we have a bias where we tend to look towards the negative. Hopefully we can overcome that, and that's really our discussion tonight is going to be all about that. But it's almost like it's a built-in trait that when there are two ways of looking at something, it's too easy to go down the path of focusing on the negative way. Now, when we're talking about relationships, so obviously this concept will also seep into our relationships. And we have different ways where obviously we're interacting with people. We have friends, we have loved ones, we have spouses, we have siblings, we have neighbors, whoever it is that we're in touch with. And whenever we interact with people, we have a subconscious or a conscious judging that we are judging the other person. We are assessing what they say, we're listening, but we're taking it all in and we're coming to different conclusions about them. And oftentimes, we hear things or we see things and actions that people do, and we cannot wrap our head around it. And we're like, "Oh my God, how is this person doing this?" Or saying this. And we have this negative outlook on that person. And once we get into that frame of mind and we think about that person in a negative way, so then that automatically that makes a separation between us and that person. And we look at ourselves as a little bit higher, a little bit more moral, a little bit better. And then the other person who is not as ethical and not as good, so to speak, we look at them a little bit from above, below. What does that do in turn? That makes the other person feel that you don't value them. And then they're going to also reciprocate that feeling back to you, and they're going to deep a stronger and a deeper trench, and you're going to then again look at them in a negative way, and it's a vicious cycle, and relationships fall apart. So there is a whole nother topic, which is not today's discussion, which is how we can try to influence another person, how we can try to help them, but that's beyond the scope of today's discussion. That's going to be discussed next week. Today, we're going to be digging in, and we're going to be focusing on how we, in our mind, forget about what you're going to tell the other person and how you're going to try to help them to overcome this. We're going to, in our own mind, how we can have a positive outlook when we are thinking about other people, we are interacting with other people, and in our relationships in general. So, obviously, no one is perfect, right? No. Everyone has their shortcomings. Everyone has their problems. And ultimately, if we are going to, each time someone falls short of our expectation of what they should be doing or how they should be doing something or what they should be saying, so then that will ultimately pull apart these relationships and create a certain distance and a negative energy between the people. So, I want you, for a moment, before we move on, for a moment, think about how a negative bias or a fundamental, a negative outlook can affect any of our relationships. Think of a specific relationship which you feel maybe there is a certain negative vibe that you're feeling, and then what options can you come up with in your mind to reduce the bias and ultimately the impact that it has on that relationship? Just take one moment just to think about it for a second. And we have negativity bias, which is to focus on the shortcomings over the strengths of the other person. And then there is the fundamental attribution error, which is ultimately we are attributing certain things that we see in people to malicious intent or character flaws in that other person. So that's just the opening of today's session. And essentially today's discussion is going to be split up into three sections. The first one is the negativity bias. The second one is the fundamental attribution error. And the third session is to go into a little bit of a deeper outlook, and not just on a advice level, so to speak, but more on a philosophical and on a Torah level, to see how this outlook of being positive is the truth, and it's really who the other person is. But we'll get there soon. So that is going to be today's discussion. So it should be a good discussion today. Any questions before we move on? Any thoughts? No? Everything good? All right. So, Maimonides, in Maimonides' book of laws, Mishneh Torah, where he goes through all the laws of the Torah, Maimonides has one section of laws called the laws of ethics. The laws of ethics. What is the correct ethical way that a person should live their life? And throughout these laws, Maimonides, the Rambam, discusses all the various important what we should believe, how we should live our life, so on and so forth. And he talks about what happens in regards to, obviously, there is a spectrum of how we can live our life. We can be excessively spending, or we can be a miser without spending a dollar. Now, where on the spectrum should we B. So we obviously have our natural inclination into a certain direction. Some people are more excessive. Some people will spend more money. They're a bit more, as we say, breit in Yiddish. They're a bit more wide. They're a bit more spendy. They're easier on the credit card. And then there are some people who are by nature a bit more, I wouldn't say a miser, but a bit more conscious of their spending and so on. Now, each one has a plus and a minus. Each one has a pro and a con. So the question is, which direction, when it comes to these different types of character traits, where should we put ourselves on the spectrum? And the Rambam, Maimonides, gives a golden rule. And the golden rule says, always go for the middle. Right to the center, that's where you should try to find yourself. Because the middle space is not to be a reckless spender, but on the other hand, you're not going to be too frugal and not spend on the important things that you need to spend on. So the Rambam says, find yourself in the middle space. Now, the question is, how do we train ourselves to be in that middle space? To be on that happy medium? Especially, as we're going to see, if a person is more naturally inclined to one or the other ways, how do we bring ourselves to stay in the middle lane? So Maimonides writes, if you look on page 149, text 3a, over here, Maimonides sets a premise. And he says that our behavior influences our character. Nature versus nurture. Julian, you want to read it?
Yes, that's 3a.
3a.
Right.
Yes.
How can we cultivate proper attitudes and traits so that they become ingrained features of our personality? We engage once, then a second time, and yet a third time in behaviors that embody the balanced ideal. We repeat the desired behavior consistently. Eventually, the proper actions become natural rather than difficult, seamlessly integrated into our character.
So the Rambam says, if you're trying to cultivate a positive attitude and trait, keep on doing it. Don't let up. Don't give up. You do it once, you do it a second time, and each time you do it, you're going to train your mind, you're going to train your psyche to that is the balanced way to live. And it's going to take some time until you get used to it. But ultimately, when you keep at it and practice makes perfect, ultimately you will succeed. But then the Rambam says a very important caveat. And this caveat is as follows. If a person is excessive to one of the directions, is a little bit too extreme in their spending, let's say, or too extreme in their misering, that's a word, then that's not going to work. It's not going to work just to say, just keep on doing the middle path and you'll eventually succeed. No. Maimonides says a very important fundamental. Read text 3b on page 149.
If you are already swayed to one extreme, distance yourself from it by moving to the opposite extreme and accustom yourself to it for a long time.
So Maimonides says, if you are too excessive in one of the directions, too extreme, you have to pull yourself to the other side, to the opposite end, for some time, and then you can slowly move to the middle. If you're just going to say, we'll move to the middle path, then you're going to fall back to your old ways. So my father would always give, whenever he would talk about this, of trying to overcome if it's a negative attribute or a trait or something, he would always say, he would use a stick, like a metal stick. If it's bent one way and you're trying to get it straight, if you bend it straight, it's going to fall back and still not be totally straight. So you have to bend it all the way, and then it's going to bounce back and it's going to be straight, right? So that's just on a very physical level to understand it. Now, so ultimately, when we are trying to work on ourselves, to look at another person in a positive way and not with a negative eye, we have to keep on doing it again and again and again. And we have to just keep on training ourselves to look at people in a positive eye. There is a beautiful story of there is a Chabad rabbi. His name is Rabbi Gerelik. Rabbi Gerelik was the first Chabad rabbi. He moved in 1959 to Milan, Italy. He was the first rabbi in Italy, and he moved there in 1959. Milan, Italy, in 1959 was a totally different world than what you imagine of Italy today, where there was kosher restaurants and Jewish schools and so on and so on. There was nothing of that. They moved there, there was nothing, no kosher food, anything. And now Rabbi Gerelik, he had an interesting life story because he came out of Russia in the early 1950s. And when he came to New York, his parents ended up emigrating to Israel, and he ended up emigrating to the United States. So he was a young yeshiva student, and he was kind of on his own, and he was in the yeshiva, and he was studying and so on, but the Rebbe, who had just become the Rebbe at that point, in 1951, so the Rebbe would really try to take care of him and would help him out and make sure that he has everything that he needs and so on, and really took a personal interest in what's going on in his life. And what happened is ultimately Rabbi Gerelik, he was a Russian boy, and he was marriageable age, and he was dating these American girls, and it was a whole new world to him. And the Rebbe took a lot of interest in helping him on the dating scene, so to speak, to find the shidduch, and ultimately really helped him, practical tips, etc. And then he got engaged, and he got married to this American girl. She grew up over here in the United States, and then together they moved to Italy to start Chabad in Milan. So it's like you're pulling all these different parts, and poof, they end up in Milan. So there was one time where he's writing a letter to the Rebbe, and he's writing about how great his wife is. And life in Milan wasn't easy, but he's writing this letter, and he's going on, singing her praises, so to speak, in this letter. And at the end of the whole letter, he's like, maybe I was a little bit excessive in writing so many, virtues and so on. Maybe I shouldn't have written so much, but, this is my feelings. So the Rebbe didn't send him a reply letter. The Rebbe just crossed out one word in his sentence that he wrote. And the Rebbe crossed out the word not. Maybe I should not have written excessively about her virtues. And the Rebbe says, took out the word not. You should write excessively about her, about how great she is. You should keep on complimenting your wife. It's a very, very good thing. And so he really took that as a lesson. He's like, you have to keep on being positive, always, complimenting, finding the virtues in another person. And you can never have it too much, ultimately. And really, there is a fascinating story where there was a rabbi who was walking with his students. They're just walking down the street. True story. And they see a dead dog on the side of the road. Now, who likes seeing a dead dog? It's an ugly sight. It's unfortunate, but it's an ugly sight. Maybe they were, it's decomposing or whatever. And the students are like, ooh, this is horrible. And the rabbi says, he points out and he says, that dog actually had really nice teeth. Now, the students are like, what? Rabbi, what's going on? Like, why are you focusing on this dead dog's teeth? And the rabbi says, whenever you see something, yes, we are all aware that the dog is dead and it doesn't look nice. But try to find the positive over here. Try to focus on something, a positive element, a silver lining. Yes, the dog is dead. But note that it actually had really beautiful teeth. And it's the book is called Chovot HaLevavot. It's a famous, actually it's a very famous, it was just reprinted in English, part of it, The Gate of Trust, where it talks about trust in God and so on. So this is another part of that book. It's called The Gate of Submission. So over there, he brings down this story to give us that positivity outlook. That whenever we come somewhere, and yeah, you're able to look at it in a negative way. And that's our natural inclination, is to be disgusted by something like that. But he says there is another perspective. And it's a much better perspective to look at it with a positive eye. And the idea is that this is in every situation in life. So obviously, for the story of Rabbi Gorelik, that was with his wife. The Rabbi is telling him, you should sing her praises. It's a very good thing. But this really translates and it applies into every area of life. All of these different things happen to us in our life. We meet all different types of people. We have all types of relationships. And it's very easy sometimes to be like, oh, over here, there is no silver lining. There is no good over here. I can't find anything positive about this person. And the truth is that no, it's not. You can always try to focus. It's not saying you should be dumb, right? That's not the idea. It's not saying, be blind to the fact that there is maybe a negative trait over here. It's a whole different discussion. How do we deal with that? How we can maybe influence them in a positive way. That we'll deal with next week. And it's also not saying if someone does something wrong, that now they're off the hook because you're looking at their positive. No, that's, again, law is the law, and the judge is the judge, and the lawyer is the lawyer. But you, as an individual, who you're not a lawyer, and maybe you are, but you're not a judge, and you're not a cop on the street having to implement the law. You're just a neighbor, or you're just a friend, and you have a relationship with this person. Focus on their positivity. As a rabbi, right, I visit Jewish people in prison, right? You go to as they call it, the Milton Hilton. It's the Santa Rosa, the Santa Rosa County Prison. And unfortunately, there is Jewish people who are incarcerated, and it's very, I guess the word is easy. It's natural to feel like, oh, what did these guys do? Well, why are they here, and so on. So actually, whenever I go, I never look up to see what they did, what was their crime, because why should I come from a judgmental place to come and meet them? I'm here as a rabbi. I want to come. Maybe I want to inspire them. Maybe I want to teach them something. We put on tefillin or whatever it is, and I'm not their lawyer. I'm not a judge. That's not my job. I'm coming from a place to focus on their good. And that's right. But that's not just for a rabbi. It's for everyone. Whenever you meet someone, try to focus on their good side. We're all aware that there might be other sides to them, but we should focus and we should put into the limelight, into the spotlight, their positive side. So, on that note, if you want to take a short moment and think into a relationship, any relationship that you might have, think about a positive element, quality that person in that relationship has, and ultimately think how that quality illustrates itself in real life, and how that plays out. Because of them having this positive quality, it brings out positive outcomes in the relationship. So in other words, we all have good qualities, we all have negative qualities. That's a given. It's the way God created us. But how can we focus on the good qualities that the people in our life have, and the people who we are in a relationship. And it could be any type of relationship. It could be from a very close loved one to just a technical interaction that you have with a client, with a coworker, or with your hairdresser, right? And it's really to develop our character by focusing always on the positive side that we encounter. All right. Take a short moment, think about it. So, there's a great story. Max needs a taxi. And he stands on Fifth Avenue and he waves his hand and poof, the taxi pulls right up. And as he gets in, so the cab driver's like, oh, perfect timing. You just stuck out your hand and here comes the cab. Just like Saul. So Max is like, who's Saul, Mr. Cabby? So he's like, oh, Saul Gold. He's the type of guy, whatever he wanted, he always got it. Like if he needed a taxi, he would straight away come. Not like me. If I need a taxi, I have to wait ages and ages until they come. So Max is like, well, no one's perfect. So he's like, no, except for Saul. Saul, he was absolutely perfect. He was such a great athlete. He could have played football for the 49ers. Like, he was the most amazing. Not like me. I'm just like a couch potato. I have no hope. And, Saul, he's an angel. Not like me. I have 2 left feet. And Max is like, wow, Saul must be someone really, really special. And the cab's like, yeah. He was like the most amazing person. You can say that again. He remembered everyone's birthday. Not like me that I forget everyone's birthday. I can't think straight. And he's like, and he's way better than me. He would never get into arguments with his wife and so on. And he's like, what an amazing person. It's like, how did you meet him? So the cab driver's like, well, actually, I never met Saul. So now Max is totally perplexed. He's like, what? He never met Saul? He's like, how do you know so much about him? So he's like, well, I married his widow. So sometimes we are put into a spot where everything that we look at the other person is never going to be good, right? And it's like this, right? So we have to be able to train ourselves, to teach ourselves. It's a muscle that we have to develop it. We have to exercise it to be able to train ourselves to look with a positive eye on people. There's a beautiful story in the Talmud, and the Talmud says, what is the difference between a good guest and a bad guest? What's the difference? You can have the same person going to the same host for dinner, but can come out with 2 totally different perspectives on what just happened, right? It's a short text, relatively. Susan, you want to read? It's page 152, text number 5. Ben Zoma.
Ben Zoma used to say, what does a good guest say? My host extended himself remarkably for me. Look how much meat he brought before me. How much wine he set before me. How many fine rolls he laid out before me. My host did this all just for me. And then go ahead.
Next, the bad guest.
What does a bad guest say? Can I consider this host as having extended himself for me? All I ate was the 1 piece of bread. I ate just 1 slice. I drank just 1 cup. If this host exerted himself, it was only for his own wife and children. With regard to the good guest, the verse proclaims, he remembers to augment what was done, singing people's praises. With regard to a bad guest, it is stated, people therefore fear him. Oh, like a food reviewer, restaurant reviewer.
Exactly. Very well said. So the Talmud gives these two different types of people, of how they look at their host and how they critique them, so to speak. So you have the reducer and you have the augmenter. So the reducer is the one who diminishes the favor and says, oh, they were anyways going to eat dinner. And they were anyways going to make all this food. And they were anyways going to open up this great bottle of wine. And all they wanted was some entertainment. So they invited me over to just add to the atmosphere. But, what did I eat already? I had a little piece of bread and a cup of wine. Big deal. They couldn't care less about me. But then you have the augmenter who magnifies the favor and ultimately feels the love that the other person has put in so much time and effort in preparing a delicious meal. And the augmenter is coming from the point of view that, well, if I wouldn't have gone for dinner, they probably would just be eating like instant mashed potatoes in the microwave or something. And now that I came, they took out all this great meat and they opened up this beautiful bottle of wine. And it's like, wow, this is, how special and how loving and caring are these people, right? So when you have a person who is an augmenter, so then that's a great guest, and you tell them thank you, and you appreciate what they did for you, and so on and so forth. Versus the person who is the reducer, that's a pretty bad guest, and you're probably never going to invite them back again. And as the verse in the book of Job is that people therefore fear that individual because it's not enjoyable to be around a person who is going to be so cynical and pessimistic about a favor that you did for them and you invited them for dinner. But maybe you did have some personal reasons why you did it, and maybe you were anyways doing dinner, but ultimately you prepared good food and you hosted them with a smile and you gave them a good experience. The least you can do is say thank you, right? And the same also works in a relationship, right? We have coworkers, we have friends who do something nice for us. They give you a gift. There is an amazing story. It's a little bit of a long story, but I'll just tell you the short of it because it really hits the nail on the head for this. There were some ritual slaughterers, the shochet, right? So one of the big meat plants is in Uruguay. So they would fly from the United States. They would fly to Uruguay. They go there for a few weeks at a time, and they have a whole kosher line of production that they do. And then, they pack it and ship it out. And, they keep on doing this from time to time. So there was a group of, let's say, 20, 30 guys. These shochets, these ritual slaughterers, they come to Uruguay. They're staying at their hotel. And every morning, they would come at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And they would be working all morning, all the way till 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then at the end of the day, they would all go back to their place where they were staying, and this is how it would go daily. So one day they come. This is a true story. It's an amazing story. One day they come in the morning and they work and they do their whole shift, and then comes the afternoon and they finish for the day and they all go back home. About a half an hour later, the head of the group gets a phone call from the doorman. The guard who was at the facility calls them and is like, do me a favor. Do you have all your guys? Did they all come back home? So he's like, I think so. He goes, he counts everyone up, and instead of it being 20 guys, there's only 19. One guy is missing. He's like, that's very strange. Let me come back to the factory. Let me come see what's going on. They come in, all the guys, they come in, and they start looking around for this guy. Let's say his name was Moshe. So they come in, they're looking for Moshe, and they're calling, Moshe, where are you? They can't find him. All the way till one of the guys goes in the back, by the freezers, and he hears a faint knocking coming from the back. So he goes, he runs towards the freezer, and it's a big, massive walk-in freezer, and the door is shut, closed, and he hears banging on the door. And he quickly unlocks the door, opens it up. It was before they had the emergency switch on it and the indoor unlocking. And Moshe is there, half frozen to death. And they quickly take him, and he's fine, thank God, and they saved him. Now, so everyone's happy that they found him, but suddenly the head guy is like, 1 second, how did the doorman know that he was missing? He's like, doesn't make any sense. So he goes over to him, he tells him, sir, how did you notice? I mean, we come in every single day and we leave, it's like a whole bunch of guys coming in and out. How did you notice that one of the guys was missing? So he tells them, listen, I'll tell you. Every single morning, all of you guys come in and everyone's like half groggy, just woke up, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And everyone comes in and does their thing. But every morning, Moshe, when he walks by me, he tells me, good morning, senor. And on the way out, he says, good evening, senor. So this morning he came in and he told me good morning. But then this afternoon, I was waiting and waiting, and he never told me good evening. So I waited, maybe he was running late and so on, and he's like, it could be, he says, it can't be that he forgot. Something must have been wrong, so I called you up. So his saying good morning saved his life. And the idea over here is that when someone puts in a little bit of effort, if it's a coworker, if it's a friend, someone, and even if it's a smile, we should appreciate it, we should value it, we should notice it. That's being a good guest. A good guest is someone who takes note to the positive things that people are doing for us in our lives and are able to acknowledge it and thank it and reciprocate it. And it's a very, very powerful lesson. Yeah, that story it's a very, it's an amazing story. All right. So here comes the next question. And this is a very important question. Ultimately, people have flaws. People have problems. And we're going to encounter people who really do have a flaw. They actually have an issue. And they're either not treating us in the correct way or treating someone else in the correct way. And ultimately, at that point, it becomes a little bit harder to be able to actually look at them with a positive eye. When it's just a regular, day-to-day, basic, here and there. So then, okay, I can get it that we should look with a positive eye. But once we're talking about someone and they're really, it's hard to be able to find a positive way to cut this. So then what happens in such a case, right? Where it seems so obvious that this person is doing something negative. So again, as we said, it doesn't mean that they're off the hook, that whatever negative thing they did, they're going to have to pay up for it. And ultimately, if they did something which is wrong and whatever consequence comes out of it, they'll have to deal with it. But again, we're not the policemen, we're not the judges over here. We're just acquaintances, friends, individuals who are living life next to each other. So the question is, how should we look at such a person? A person who is doing something wrong is someone who we naturally are inclined to judge, to look at them in a negative way because they did something negative. So the question is, how should our perspective be then? So the Talmud has the most amazing story. It's a bit of a mind-blowing story about how far should you go to judge someone favorably, right? We all know the concept that we should judge someone favorably. Don't judge someone until you are in their shoes and walk a mile in them, right? There's all of these important lines and fundamentals, but the question is, how extreme do we go with that point of view? How far are we going to do mind aerobics to try to figure out acrobatics, to try to find a way to make it sound positive when it seems that it's such a negative thing, right? So here is the story in the Talmud. There's a few parts to this story. So we'll read it, we'll take a pause, we'll move on to the next part, we'll take a pause, and so on. So text 6a on page 156. Alan, you want to read?
50 what?
156, text 6a.
Okay, fellow once traveled south from Upper Galilee and was hired by a landowner for a 3-year term. On the eve of Yom Kippur, the Galilean asked his employer, "Give me my wages so I can go and feed my wife and children." The employer replied, "I have no money." The employee rejoined, "In that case, give me my wages in the form of produce," to which the employer insisted that he had none. "Give me my wages in the form of land," he pressed, but the employer replied that he owned no land. "Give me animals," "I have none." "Give me cushions and blankets," "I have none." The worker slung his tools over his shoulder and left for home in anguish.
So this is the opening of the story, the opening scene. A person who is really trying to make ends meet, and he leaves his whole family for 3 years, and goes and works and slaves away. And at the end of the 3 years of working so hard, comes to the boss and is like, it's finally time for me to go back home. Can I please get my payment so that I can come back with something to support my family? And the boss says, "I'm sorry, I have nothing to give you." Not even one, and he tries, "Give me this, give me that, food, property, clothes, you name it." And in every way, the owner says, "I'm sorry." The employer says, "I have nothing, I can't give you." Now, mind you, this guy has a bunch of employees, this guy has a big house, and he has all this stuff. And our natural response to such a story is going to be like, what a liar, what a thief. He hires a guy for 3 years and doesn't even pay him. What a disaster of a person. But that's not the end of the story. Turn to 6b. Justin, you want to read it? Page 158.
After the festival, the employer took the worker's wages in his hand and set off for the worker's home. He took 3 donkeys, the first laden with food, the second with beverages, and the third with assorted delicacies. After they ate and drank together, the employer handed him his wages. The employer then asked the Galilean, "Tell me, when you requested your wages and I replied I had no money, what did you suspect?" Responded the employee, "I told myself that perhaps the opportunity to purchase merchandise inexpensively had just presented itself, and you purchased it with the money you had, and so you had no money available. And when you requested animals and I said I had none, what did you suspect?" Replied the employee, "I told myself that perhaps the animals are rented to others. When you asked for land and I claimed to own no land, what did you suspect? Perhaps the land is leased to others. When you asked for produce and I said I had none, what did you suspect? Perhaps they are not tithed. And when I insisted that I owned no cushions or blankets, what did you suspect? Perhaps he consecrated all his property to heaven."
So this guy, this employee, really played mind acrobatics to try to justify and find the positive way, the most positive, flowery way to make this sound good. Now, listen, it's hard. It is hard, and it's quite original with the theories that he comes up with.
But Rabbi, it's the eve of Yom Kippur. What good Jewish person is going to give all those things away on Yom Kippur? Even if they're owed.
So, so listen. So he said, I have to come up with a rationale, positive rationale, how to look at this employer, because it can't be that he is such a horrible person. So he keeps on justifying this and coming up with ways to make this sound positive. Now, it doesn't mean that the guy is right. It doesn't mean, if you have to pay your employers and you suddenly have a good sale, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay your employees and go and buy new stock, right? So maybe the guy did a mistake, but in the employee's mind, he's like, okay, you know what? He had too good of a deal to let go, and that's why I wasn't paid. So, what was the end of the story? Pat, you want to read? Text 6C on page 160.
The employer exclaimed, I swear that it was so. I had made a vow concerning all of my property, consecrating it to the temple. I did this because I was upset with my son, Camus, for not engaging in Torah study, and I sought to disinherit him. When I later came to the sages of the south, they released all my vows. As for you, just as you judged me favorably, so may God judge you favorably.
So the guy tells him, you know what? You were absolutely right. That is exactly what happened. I had gone a bit extreme. I went a bit nuclear on my son because I wasn't happy with him, and I was like, you know what? I am going to make this vow, such an extreme vow, that I'm giving everything away to the temple. Now, obviously, that's not a very good thing to do. A person shouldn't give everything they own to charity and now become a beggar and a pauper asking for money. That's not the way to live. So, after some time later, he went to the rabbis to nullify his vow, and then got his stuff back, and now was able to come and repay this, to pay up to this employee. But during the time that the employee came and asked him to get paid, he actually owned nothing, because he had given it all away. So that is I want to just put something into perspective. The Talmud, it's 2,000 pages long. Okay, Talmud is a vast sea of information, but there was so much that wasn't included in the Talmud, and the fact that this story was picked out to be put into the Talmud is because there is a very, very powerful lesson over here to teach us, and that lesson is that we have to try to the utmost of our ability to be able to find the positive, and we should be biased in the positivity. We should really try the hardest that we can with our mind, even if we have to go to these acrobatics of finding justifications for what people are doing, because we are not able to really understand what a person is going through until we are in their shoes. And ultimately, we never really will be in their shoes. So we never really will 100% be able to understand them. But at least we should try to be able to find a positive way to frame this, the same way you yourself wouldn't want to be judged in a negative way. So you should also look at the other person in a positive way. And it doesn't have to be in a way like, oh, the rabbi said I have to look at this in a positive way. How do I find this? No, on the contrary. It's when the other person realizes, right, the other person in this relationship realizes that you are really, truly trying to see the good within them, that will pull out and reciprocate the good that is within them. Right? Imagine this employee comes home after 3 years, and his wife was at home taking care of their kids, and he's like, at least I'll come home and the kids are taken care of and the house is functioning and so on. And he comes home and he sees the kids are running up and down the walls, and there's piles and piles of laundry and garbage, and the place is looking like a wreck. And he's like, he could come in and be like, oh my God, what are you doing? You're not taking care of our family. You're letting everything, you can't even take care of our house and of our kids. I'm sure he didn't say that. Even if that would be the case. This is a type of guy, if he was able to look so positively at his employer, even if his house, seems to be doing so badly, so to speak, If he's gonna come on and find this, he's gonna be like, tell his wife, it seems that you're having like a really hard day, and maybe you're not feeling so well, and it's very overwhelming. What can I help you with? Maybe I could take the kids on a walk, and you can try to get stuff organized over here, right? And so imagine how she's gonna receive this, right? If he's coming in with this whole judgmental and being negative about it, so then that's going to reciprocate very quickly. He'll be like, you weren't even here for 3 years. You're going to come and give your opinion on how we run this household? No? So he's, if he comes with a positive energy and he's trying to find the positive over here, so then he's going to get that back. So it's an amazing thing to train ourselves not to judge the other person. And really, and in truth, when you look at another person and when you analyze, so to speak, their actions, which again, it's an important thing to note. It's not saying that they are off the hook because of whatever positive light you can shine at them. If they did something wrong, if they did a crime, God forbid, they're going to have to pay it up. But we are not the ones who are in that capacity. We are not the ones who are enforcing those laws. There are policemen, and there are judges, and there's a court system, etc., which they do that, and ultimately they'll get whatever consequence it is. But we're just talking amongst people, if it's amongst the family, amongst friends, amongst acquaintances, where you are, there's always these stories going around, this person did this, this person did that, and suddenly they get canceled, and they're this, and they're thrown out of society. And it's like, 1 second, maybe we can give them the benefit of doubt. Maybe we can look at this in a try to find the positive outlook to look at this individual. Now, sometimes the law itself mandates that they have to be thrown out of society, which, okay, that's what the law says, and if they have to be locked up, they have to be locked up. But when we're talking human to human, we can give a person a basic decency, a basic respect, and ultimately that benefit of doubt. And the Alter Rebbe in the book of Tanya, Rabbi Schneur Zalman, gives 2 very important approaches to this idea of how to judge someone favorably. On what premise, so to speak? And he says that there are external challenges and there are internal challenges that every person experiences, and you can't really know what this person is going through that has made them, ultimately brought them down to say whatever they said, to do whatever they did, etc. And he says like this. He says, there's a short text, 7b. Nuria, you want to read it? Page 162.
Their livelihood requires of them to navigate the marketplace all day and to linger at the street corners. Thus, their eyes witness all temptations, and what the eye sees, the heart desires. Additionally, the nature of their instinctive impulse leads them to undesirable action, for it burns on them like a baker's fiery oven. The instinctive impulse is not the same in everyone.
So he gives 2 very important angles to look at this, right? First of all, he says, what is this individual's environment? What is their internal, first the environment, the external, right? Maybe they are coming from a very hard background, broken family, abuse. There can be 101 reasons why someone is doing something negative. Or maybe they are, imagine, let's just use it as an example, a person who does insider trading, okay? So we're very quick to judge. Oh my God, why did you do it? It's illegal, right? But then it's like, you have to consider, 1 second, you are a school teacher. And in your environment, To be the teacher of the year would be nice, but it's like there's not that sense of competition, so to speak, versus this guy who works on Wall Street, and if he wants to bring bread at home at night, and he wants to go up in the levels of the job, they really have to stand out. And it's so competitive, and it's so fierce, and everyone's running over the next person, and it's like, yeah, they've been enticed into doing insider trading because that's the only way they feel they can survive, right? So we have to understand where this person is coming from and what they're going through to understand why they're doing certain things. And then comes the internals. Every person is created differently. We have different inclinations. We have different reasonings. We have different ways of analyzing things. And we all have a unique character. And, to someone, to one person, they can't fathom why a person would raise their voice and scream at another person when I get upset, I shut up and I walk away and I relax myself. Why can't they do that? Right? No, because people are different. And then people are hardwired in different ways. And the way your animalistic soul works is not the same as someone else's. And you cannot judge them based on your own experiences. You have to be able to give them the benefit of doubt of the stuff that they have gone throughout their life. And that's a very, very, it's a powerful tool, which when we realize that, when we put ourselves into this frame of mind, suddenly, again, we're not justifying their actions. But what we're saying is that we don't have this, so to speak, superior position morally or for whatever, on whatever ground above this person. No, we're looking at them eye to eye. We're realizing they had a hard life. They've done bad decisions because of it, granted. But when you can drop the gavel, you're not the judge, right? There's a judge, there's a jury, that's their job, they're doing that. But we're not the jury, we're not the judge. We are human beings interacting with others, we have relationships with them, and we have to be able to give them that real, true benefit of doubt. All sounds nice, no? Sounds amazing. Sounds really beautiful. Sounds flowery. Sounds like utopian if we were all to live like this. I mean, there would be no misunderstandings. There would be relationships would blossom and flower. Everything would be so nice. But then it's like, 1 second. Rabbi, how can you be serious about this? It sounds great in theory. But is that really who the other person is? Was that really their intent? Those acrobatics in your mind of trying to find the positive reason why the person did it, and you're blaming it on their upbringing and on their this and on their that and on their grandmother and on their... No, they did a crime, they did something wrong, and that's it. They're a bad guy, they're whatever, throw them out. So the question is really like this. We have to reframe the question. The question is, who are we for real? Who are we? Who are you? And there's a famous poem written by Shel Silverstein, if you've heard of the poet. And they write, I asked the zebra. You can see it, it's on page 165, text 8. I asked the zebra, are you black with white stripes or are you white with black stripes? So the zebra responds to me and says, are you good with bad habits or are you bad with good habits? Are you noisy with quiet times or are you quiet with noisy times? Are you sad with some happy days or are you happy with some sad days? And it keeps on going. And the bottom line of the poem says, and on the zebra went and asked all these questions, and I'll never ask a zebra about their stripes again. So, So that's the poem. But what's the message of the poem? It's a great poem, but it has a good message. The message is that we are complex creatures. It's the way we are. God created us, and we're complicated. There is different ways to pull at a human being. You can pull the positive, you can pull the negative. There's many ways to cut the cake. So the question is, which one is the real you, or the real of the individual who you are judging favorably, not favorably? Who is the real them? So if you read this poem, and if you just take it according to the way we maybe spoke about in the first lesson about our godly soul and our animalistic soul, and it would seem that our animalistic soul is our natural inclination, and it's our default setting, and therefore, whenever we do something, if we didn't actively think about our godly soul kicking in and deciding over here on the situation, so then, it's probably our animalistic soul, and we could be pretty bad people at times, unfortunately. But the truth is that when you dig a little bit deeper, and you do a bit of a spiritual autopsy on someone, and you open them up, and you try to find out who is the real person over here, you're going to find actually that it's the opposite. You're going to find that really, truly, in the depth of the individual, they are good. They are not only good, as we know, Genesis, right in the beginning, as the first human being was being created, Adam and Eve, God says, it's text 9 on page 166, God says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. We are created in the image of God. We are created in the likeness of God. That is the way that the God created us. At our very essence, at our very core, we are created in the image of God. And that is our true identity. That is our true character. Now, obviously, as we develop and as we grow, and we have our godly soul, we have our animalistic soul, there's many layers that grow on top of it. But when you look at what is the true human being and who is it really at its core, who are we inherently? We are created in the image of God. And that is something which every single individual, by default, a human being by default, has been created in the image of God. If they have a face, and they have eyes, and they have a nose, and a mouth, and a head, and a body, they have been created in the image of God. So by the mere fact that they are human, it means that they have been created in the image of God. And therefore, to answer Mr. Shel Silverstein's question, who are we? We are good, even though we have bad habits, right? So we have bad habits, but we're not bad with good habits. That's the wrong perspective. Ultimately, we have our true identity, even though from time to time we deviate from that identity, from who we really are. And there's a great tale. It's a parable. It's a real story. There's a guy who comes late at night, and he's traveling in the days of the Cossacks in Russia, and he comes to a inn, and it's late at night, it's midnight, and he comes in. He's like, "Is there maybe an empty room I can stay? I have an early morning train that I need to catch, but I need to put my head down for a few hours." So the innkeeper says, "Well, actually, we're totally full, but on the top floor there is a Cossack who is staying over there, and there is an empty bed in his room, so he probably won't mind. You can go sleep over there." So he's like, "All right, thank you very much. Do me a favor," he tells the innkeeper, if you could come and wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning before dawn, because I have a train to catch at the station." "Sure, no problem." So the guy goes upstairs, he goes to bed. The Cossack is sleeping on one bed, he's sleeping on the other bed. And 4 o'clock in the morning comes, there's a knock on the door, get up, you have a train. The guy gets up, he puts on his clothes, and he starts running to the train. And as he's 3/4 of his way to the train station, he looks down and he looks at himself, and he realizes he's wearing the Cossack's clothes. He put on the wrong clothing. And he looks at himself and he's like, That innkeeper, what an idiot. He woke up the Kazakh. He didn't wake me up. So we all have our true identity. Sometimes we can be wearing the wrong costume. We can be wearing the wrong uniform, and we look like a Kazakh instead of ourselves. But in truth, when we look beyond all the externals and you look at the internal, at the real, who is the true individual over here, you're going to see that it's really a godly soul and a person who's created in the image of God. And if we are able to put that as our perspective, if we are able to put our mind that that should be our reality, again, it's not easy. It's not easy because we do have an evil inclination. But if we could have that to be our reality, and we can look at other people to see their core, to see their truth, to see their soul, their neshama, then it's a whole different relationship. But here's the catch, and it's a very important catch. And the catch is, if you yourself, your whole day, and you're in your own personal life, if we, in our own lives, our animalistic soul is the one who is deciding factor, is the one who is dictating how our life should be, and we're always selfish, and we're always full of ourselves, so to speak, so then of course, when we look at the other person, we're also going to look at their animalistic soul, and at their selfish self, and yeah, we're going to be very quick to judge. But if we, in our own personal lives, if we live a life that our godly soul is the one which is the dominant one, and we really prioritize our God-given mission to us as human beings in this world, with a mission that God put us in here to live a life of 70, 80, 100 years, and we're here to help other people. We have a mission of bettering the world, of fixing the world, of elevating the world, of making the world into a dwelling place, an abode for God through each and every action that we do. So then suddenly, when we are interacting with another person, and there are certain actions that seem to be negative on their part of what they're doing, we are able to overlook that. We're not blind to it. We're not dumb. That's not the point. But we are able to see beyond it. We're able to see who the true self of this individual is. So really what it is to be able to teach ourselves and to train ourselves to separate the truth, the true identity of the individual, separating that from their actions, which are external. And their actions don't really reflect always who their true self is. And it's like if you have a child, your own child, or a very, very good friend, or someone who does something which is not exactly up to par, love blinds, right? When we have true love for someone, it blinds on the imperfections. If we are able to really see beyond the external factors of the other person and are able to look at the part which really connects us to them, which is that we both have a godly soul and we are both here because God created us in God's image. So then a lot of the externals, as important as they are, will have a second class place when it comes to our focusing on this other individual. That was good. All right. So it says that when Mashiach will come, it's going to be the ultimate redemption. And when Mashiach will come, Mashiach will be the true judge. What does it mean that Mashiach will be the true judge? It says that Mashiach is going to be a type of person who is going to be able to judge another individual, each and every one of us ultimately, but will do it not by what they see with their eyes or what they hear with their ears. The verse in Isaiah, it's chapter 11, Isaiah says that they're going to judge by the smell of their nose. What does it mean, this? How do you judge by smell? not by what you see and what you hear. It says that Mashiach will have an extra sense to be really able to smell and to really understand who this person is and what they were going through when they did this action. So in other words, Mashiach is looking at an individual who sinned at whatever sin they did, and now they have to judge them, and they have to say, okay, you did this, you get that, etc. And Mashiach is going to look and say, 1 second, let's take it all, let's take the whole package into consideration. They did this action, you're right, they sinned, but look how many times they tried to overcome it. And look at these outside external factors that played into it. And look at their background of what they went through. And look at all of these other aspects that all were against the current, so to speak. So then of course this person sinned because they stood no chance, so to speak. So Mashiach will be able to excel at looking at the individual at their core. And in such a way, their flaw will be put into context. We don't see what is really going through every individual, so we're very quick to judge. When Mashiach will judge, it's going to be a whole different outlook. It's going to be a whole new way of looking at people and at what they do, taking it all into consideration. It says that when a person passes away and we go to heaven, right? Our soul leaves our body, we go to heaven. So then we come to the heavenly court. And the heavenly court, it says, so that there's a fascinating verse where it says that when we come to the heavenly court, we judge ourselves. Now, how does that work? So it says that we are shown almost like a movie of our whole life. But we're not aware that we're watching our own life. We see a life living with all of these different actions that this individual is doing. And at every turn, at the culmination of it all, the heavenly court says, "No, Yankala, what do you think?" They ask you, "What do you think? What should we do with this person? How should we judge this individual?" So the Talmud says, if during your lifetime you were a person who was positively biased and was always looking with a positive eye and judging people favorably, so then you're going to come and that's going to be you're going to go back to your old shoe, and you're going to judge them favorably. And then they're going to be like, aha, okay, you said it. This is what happens. And this is you. This is your life. You get this. But if, God forbid, a person lived their life being very cynical and critical of other people and their actions, and they come to heaven and they're shown this whole life and they're very critical of this person, and they cut the law. They did it. They said it. And that's what's going to happen, right? So the idea is we have to keep on being able to train ourselves. And again, it's really like a muscle. You have to keep on exercising it and going again and again and again and really training ourselves to be able to look at something through a positive lens. There's a beautiful story of the previous Chabad Rebbe. His name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And one time, he was a child, he came to his father, and he asked his father, we have one mouth, one nose, but two eyes. Why do we have two eyes? Why did God not suffice with creating one eye? So his father tells him like this: you have two eyes, a right eye and a left eye. God created each one with its unique purpose. The right eye is how you should look at other people. You should always look at people. The right side in Kabbalah shows on kindness, on giving, on positivity. So whenever you look at someone else, you should always look at them in a very positive light, in a very positive way, in a kind, giving way. But when you look at yourself, that's when you use your left eye and you see your own issues, and you should be critical of yourself to better yourself. If you should be critical of anyone, it's of yourself. So we should try to be right eye dominant. Now, I don't know if everyone's right eye dominant. I am right eye dominant, but I am left-handed. Go try to shoot a rifle with that. Doesn't work. So it's when we train ourselves to use our positive outlook, our positive lenses of looking at something in a good light, then when a person dies, we suddenly, all their negative things all disappear. And we give a eulogies and we say, oh, this person was such a great person and they did so much kindness and they did so much this and so much good over here. And all the negative things all disappeared. And no one mentions them anymore. Oh, well, they died, right? So we want to focus on their positive, a good memory of them. But why does it only have to be once they die? Why can't we live our life with the people who are alive around us also like this? Right? It doesn't only have to be in their eulogy that you talk positively about them. It could also be while they're alive. So if we have this outlook firmly in place, so then we can proceed to our next lesson, which is going to be next week, which is to discuss how we can guide people to overcome their problems and flaws, to influence them in a good way. But first, you need to have this really set in stone. Once we have the positive outlook in the way we look at them and interact with them, so then when we come to them in a really positive, true, loving way, so then we're able to actually have a positive influence over them. But then we're going to see about next week. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.